Good evening, boys and girls. Are you ready for bed? Are you ready for a bedtime story? This story is an original E3D remix of Mr. Gumpy's outing. As you listen, I want you to think, would you believe a girl if she came home and told a story like the girl in this story tells when she gets home? Once upon a time, Mr. Gumpy thought to himself, I am going to go in that boat again. Never mind what happened last time with the chickens and the goats and the hens and the cat and the dog and the cow and those kids all falling into the water. Forget about that. I'll just go in the boat all by myself. And if anybody asks, I'm just going to say, no, you cannot come with me in my boat. And so Mr. Gumpy took his boat and put it into the water and started to paddle down the stream. When sure enough, he came across the little boy and the little girl again. Mr. Gumpy, can we go in your boat again? No, I don't think so, not this time. Please. No. And Mr. Gumpy sailed on past. And as he turned around, he saw that the little boy and the little girl were fighting, and the boy pushed the girl into the water. Oh my gosh, not again, he said to himself, and he turned his boat around and paddled up to save the little girl. She got into the boat, all soaking wet and crying. The boy had already run away because he didn't want to get shouted at, and so now Mr. Gumpy had a soaking wet, crying little girl in his boat. He calmed her down, gave her a towel and a sandwich from his picnic box, and said, you just sit there for a while, and when I'm finished, you come back to my house and we'll give your mum a call and tell her where you are, and she can come and pick you up. Because that was a time when nobody had mobile phones or cell phones, or they couldn't just call anybody from anywhere at any time, especially from a boat in a river, and so they had to just wait until Mr. Gumpy and the girl had sailed the boat and they'd returned back to Mr. Gumpy's house. And so they continued to sail down the river, and soon enough they came across the dog. Ruff, ruff. Can I come in your boat? No, said Mr. Gumpy, not a chance. And so the dog, being a dog, and being a silly dog at that, actually jumped into the water, and he started to paddle after the boat. I'm going to follow you then, he said. And so now Mr. Gumpy had a soaking wet girl in his boat and a silly dog paddling after him. Anyway, they kept going, and Mr. Gumpy thought, well, the dog's paddling sound does sound quite nice after all, and it's a bit relaxing, and at least the girl has stopped crying now, so we can have some kind of peace and quiet. And so they kept going down the river, and sure enough, they passed the cat, and she took one look at the dog, and she thought to herself, well, I'm not going to swim behind that silly dog. But anyway, she did ask Mr. Gumpy, can I come in your boat? No chance, not today. I don't want any animals in my boat, because you all just fight, and you know what happens after that. How can I fight with a dog if he's in the water? Said the cat. Don't be cheeky, said Mr. Gumpy, and still you're not coming. Get lost. And so the cat put his tail between his legs and walked away. That was a bit easy, thought Mr. Gumpy. They kept sailing down the river, and then soon they came across the goats, the sheep, the cow, and the pig, and the chickens, who had all been let out from the farm that morning. They were all standing there on top of the bridge. Can we come in your boat, please? No, said Mr. Gumpy. You can all get lost. We'll jump in your boat then, said the animals. And Mr. Gumpy, in his boat, stood there, looking at the goats and the sheep and the cows and the pig and the chickens, all getting ready to jump into his boat. And he thought to himself, oh my word, what is going on? He tried to turn his boat around, but the dog behind kept pushing his boat straight ahead. And soon enough, the boat was directly underneath the bridge. And as the animals were just about to jump, the little girl The soaked little girl, still with a tear in her eye, looked up and saw that the animals were just about to jump into the boat, and she screamed, "Don't jump!" Well, the animals had never heard such a high-pitched noise, and all the animals, startled, tumbled backwards and fell over the other side of the bridge. And as the boat passed under the bridge, all the animals fell into the water with a great big splash. The water splashed into the boat and got the girl wet again, and she started to cry again. "Oh, my word," said Mr. Gumpy. "I thought I was going to have a bit of peace and quiet." And so he quickly sailed the boat past all the animals in the water as they were climbing out onto the bank. The silly doggy did help some of the animals get out, but then it was just the girl and Mr. Gumpy again. And the girl was a bit angry now because she was so wet. She had just been about dried in the nice warm sun with a cool breeze, and now she was wet again. "I don't like being wet, and now my socks are wet. I don't like wet socks." And so Mr. Gumpy gave her another towel and another sandwich. "It's not long now until we'll be getting out and going home." And the girl said with a sniff, "All right." And just as the boat was going around a little bend in the river, they came to another little bridge, and out jumped a monster from under that bridge. "Who's sailing under my bridge?" said the monster. "What?" said the little girl. "You're a monster. You're meant to jump out when people walk over the bridge, not sail under it. What's going on?" "Well, it's been a tough time because not many people are walking over my bridge these days, so I've decided to chase the people who sail under it." "Oh my gosh," said Mr. Gumpy. "I've never read a story about that before, a monster jumping out for people who are sailing under the bridge. What's going on today?" And so Mr. Gumpy opened up his big bag that he'd taken with him, and there, next to the other sandwich and a third towel, was a rocket and a motor. He put the motor on the back of the boat and turned it on, and he turned it all the way up to number 6, which was the highest number, and he pushed the button. And suddenly the boat was going very fast towards the monster. He put the rocket on the front of the boat, and he gave the girl the remote control, and he said, "I'll steer the boat. You press the button and fire the rocket at the monster." Well, the girl didn't know what to do. She was pinned to the back of the boat because it was going so fast, and she had a big square remote control in her hand now with a big red button saying, "Push me." They were now both heading very quickly towards the monster, who was becoming huge. "Ready?" said Mr. Gumpy. "Now!" And so the girl pushed the button as hard as she could, and the rocket blasted off from the front of the boat, travelling about 100 times faster than the boat. The girl didn't have time to blink before the rocket smashed into the monster's belly and then bounced off his fat belly and right up his nose and knocked his head off. And the fire coming out the bottom of the rocket burnt his bum on the other side. You could hear the screams of the monster coming from his mouth, on his face, on his head that was now flying in the air and back over onto the top of the bridge. The monster's head rolled onto the bridge with a big, sad face on it, and the monster's body was now all on fire, floating down the river. And the boat was now slowing down because Mr. Gumpy had turned the motor onto number 1. "We have to get out of here quite quickly," said Mr. Gumpy. But now the girl was quite dry because of the fire from the rocket had heated her up, and the wind of going so fast had dried her out quite well, and she was a bit excited now. She couldn't wait to go home and tell her mum and dad about what had just happened. "I can't wait to tell my mum and daddy about this," said the girl. "Just you wait," said Mr. Gumpy. And Mr. Gumpy, sure enough, parked the boat, and they walked all the way back over the fields to Mr. Gumpy's house. And as they were walking, they turned around and saw that the dog was kicking the monster's head and playing with it like it was a football. They got to Mr. Gumpy's house, and he went into his living room and picked up the big yellow phone, and he called the girl's mummy and said to the mummy, "Your little girl fell into the river, and I picked her up and I brought her back to my house. We had a bit of an adventure, but I'm sure she'll tell you all about that when she gets home. Would you like me to drop her off?" "Oh, yes, please, Mr. Gumpy. I'm just making the dinner. If you come round now, you can park the car outside, and you can come in for some tea as well." "Oh, that sounds very nice," said Mr. Gumpy, because he'd only come back with a soggy sandwich and hadn't even had any tea himself in the boat, and he was feeling quite tired. And so Mr. Gumpy and the girl jumped into his big motor car and drove all the way to the girl's house. He parked the car outside. They got out, and Mr. Gumpy opened the pink and blue gate, and they both walked down the path and opened the door. Mum was standing there in the kitchen and welcoming them into the kitchen, where they sat down at the kitchen table. At the table were the girl's sister and little brother, who was feeling very, very sorry for having pushed his sister into the water at the start. But they were very, very excited to hear the girl's story. They listened to the girl's story, and they couldn't believe it. But it was true. The end.